All right, we're going to do an extremely short video on analyzing pedigrees since this isn't going into too much detail, but some pedigrees are a little bit more difficult if they're based on sex-linked chromosomes. Here we will have a normal gene chromosome linked in this analysis. So far we have seen human traits that display both dominant and recessive inheritance. Researchers cannot control crosses in humans as can be done in plants, so to analyze human inheritance, geneticists study family histories. A pedigree, which is another name for a family tree, is a graphical representation of matings and offspring over multiple generations with regard to a particular trait. So in one pedigree or in one family tree, they'll track one particular trait and they'll have to make a whole separate pedigree for a different trait if you want to track it even through the same family. By studying the pedigree, the inheritance pattern can be deduced. So sometimes you'll look at a pedigree just to determine if the inheritance pattern is codominance, incomplete dominance, if it's just regular dominance, or if it's sex-linked dominance, which means that the gene is actually attached on the X or Y chromosome. And so it shows differently in males and females, and only females can be carriers because obviously males don't have a second X to hide behind. So when you look at the pedigrees, you'll see these following symbols. So if you see a square, it means that it's male. And if you see a circle, it means that it's female. If you see either of those shaded in, that means it's affected or it's an affected male or female. Some pedigrees will actually have the shaded, half shaded in kind of symbols, and that'll represent carrier. So this would be a carrier male and a carrier female, which means that um, they are not showing the condition that is being tracked, but they hold a recessive that can be passed on to their offspring. And so if you have two carriers mate, then one of their each time a kid is born, there's a 25% chance that they will both get both the recessives from their parents and maybe have a severe condition. This is important to note, though, that not all pedigrees actually do the half thing, and a lot of the times you have to figure it out because the halves actually look the same as the unfilled ones in the case of dominance of the regular condition. And so when scientists are just tracking families and they notice that one person, like an individual, presents a normal phenotype, they aren't able to mark it as 50-50 in shading because they're not really sure until they maybe find the parent, and one of the parents is definitely recessive. And so relationships here are represented in the pedigree by a horizontal line between two individuals, means mating. And if there is a branch that comes vertically down from that horizontal line, it means that there are offspring and they will be connected from above if they are siblings, right? So the line going down from them means that they were mating and they produce offspring. And then if you have shapes that are connected from above, that means that the above connection is the connection to a sibling. Okay, so again, like I said, shading represents that an individual exhibits the trait. Remember that the phenotype can be caused by two recessive alleles or be caused by one dominant allele. So it depends on the wording and the focus of the pedigree. You will have to determine which the case is. So usually pedigree questions they'll give you a family tree and then they'll show you which individuals are affected, and then they'll ask you to decide what kind of inheritance pattern it is, if it's dominant recessive, if it's sex linked, and there's a lot of or if it's dominant linked, if it's recessive linked, if it's sex linked, if it's complete dominance at all, or is it codominance or incomplete dominance. So we're going to do an example right here, and as you can see, there is the example is actually going to be about albinism. So we're going to use lowercase a to represent albino individuals because that is the recessive trait, and pigmented or normal individuals we marked using a capital A. Now every individual has two letters, and we know that because they get a copy from their mom and they get a copy from their dad. And so the affected individuals we will be able to mark right away as lowercase a, lowercase a. So here we have an affected male, and under them we can write lowercase a, lowercase a. Here's another one where we can write lowercase a, lowercase a. Here's a female that's affected. Here's a male that's affected, and here is a female that's affected. Now, we will be able to predict the offspring from the parents, but if you don't have the parents, you can still predict them using their offspring as well. So first of all, you want to see is the allele for albinism inherited as a dominant or a recessive allele? Well, we already know from an earlier video that albinism is recessive, but you should be able to prove it too with the pedigree. And so you should be able to show that, hey, these offspring are albino, but their parents are not, which means that whatever trait their parents have is whatever phenotype that their parents have, that gene or that allele of that gene is dominant because they're not showing the recessive trait that their kids are sometimes showing. Okay, so if it's a hidden trait, then that means that the condition is recessive. Again, if it's a hidden trait, that means the condition is recessive. So the parents don't have it, but somehow their kids ended up having it, which means that they each carry an allele that can lead to this condition, but they're not showing it even if they carry it, which indicates dominance. Okay, that means the albinism trait, though, is recessive. So albinism is recessive, and normal pigmentation is very dominant. Okay, and the conclusion is because, explain what we just talked about. The parents have normal pigmentation, but they manage to produce offspring that have albino characteristics, which means that each parent contains one allele for albinism. However, just containing one allele for albinism is not enough for them to show it or even partially show it, which means that the regular pigmented allele is completely dominant over the albino allele. Okay, and can you identify the genotypes of any individual? If so, mark them. So we obviously already marked the albino individuals, but given that, we should be able to mark a lot of the other individuals as well. Okay, so like I've been saying over and over, the fact that there are offspring from this couple right here that have lowercase a means that each couple has the ability to give a lowercase a and a lowercase a. But we also know that they themselves do not present as albino, which means they have to have the capital A for pigmented, which is completely dominant. So they present the phenotype of the dominant trait. Okay, so when these two mate, they produce some albino kids and they produce some that are not albino. Now, each time one of these kids gets a capital, there's no guarantee that we know what the other one is, because just because one parent gave a capital A, the other parent could have 50-50 given a capital A or a lowercase a, and we would never have known unless they had kids to tell us. So we usually put a dash there. Okay, so we don't actually know these, but we know that they have at least one capital A. Now, we're going to have some marriages happen. And then, so here, the albino female individual marries a regular presenting male. And all of their kids present as regular pigmentation, which means that although we know that the mom is always giving a lowercase a because that's all she can give, the dad is giving most likely only capital A's because out of having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids, 0% are albino. And that's a really, really high rate of pigmentation genes being passed down. And we know that he presents as normal, so that means he gets a capital A. But based on the fact that out of all of these kids, not even one was an albino kid, he probably has a second capital A, which means that 100% of the alleles that he can give are capital and dominant. So all these kids obviously present normally, which means they have a capital A. And if any of them had a lowercase a, or if any of the kids were albino, we would automatically know that the dad is a capital A, lowercase a. Okay, because then he would have to give lowercase a as well. But seeing as none of them are, he probably has two dominant alleles there. On the other hand, this family, we know that the male is albino, which means he's always giving a little a and a little a. Right, so we have little a here. And we know that these two offspring from this couple are dominant presenting, which means that they have normal pigmentation. In order for the parent over here, the girl, to give capital A sometimes, she's obviously going to be presenting as regular, but she also has to be able to give little a sometimes because 50% of their kids have the albino characteristic. And over here, we know that the male can only give the albino, so that's the second little a. This means that over here, she is definitely heterozygous because she's been given not capital A's and lowercase a's. So we can identify almost everybody in this pedigree based on just seeing the albino individuals and knowing their genotype. But we can't identify some of them because they haven't been crossed or bred with anybody else. So we would never really know what they are, but we know that they are normal pigmentation presenting.